Well, after sticking to religion all of his life, Matt meets one chance encounter that really makes him start to rethink everything he's believed in another masterful episode.
Think I'll just let the mystery be. Think I'll just let the mystery be.
Leftovers, Season 3, Episode 5. It's a Matt world. And guys, I was obviously really looking forward to this episode. You guys know I look forward to the Leftovers every single week. And sadly, we're at the point of the show where there's only like so many episodes left. And at this point, I'm just trying to appreciate the opportunity that we have these, last few episodes together. It sucks that there are that many, but the great thing is the show is still delivering, and once again, we had another amazing episode here. I really did love what we got of this episode, and, the Mad episodes are always the one that seem to hit the hardest. I mean, I think there have definitely been some really rough stuff, but the Mad episodes always are the ones that hit the hardest, and this episode was no exception. And honestly, I think out of the 3 Mad episodes we had, this might be my favorite one. I think this one was extremely well done. Sure, I love the first season episode with Matt. I think that was probably the first really, really amazing episode of the show. That was the episode that really did show, oh, this show has a lot of potential, and there's a lot of great things they can do. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we get these sort of like perspective episodes every single week, because of episodes like that. But this episode really did show how far Matt has come. It gave us everything we really could have wanted out of that character, and I just think it was incredibly well done. But let's just get into this episode, because there, as usual, is so much to talk about. So much went down in this episode, but also so little happened. And that's something that's great about The Leftovers, that so little happens, but also a lot happens, and that's something I really do love with this show. But we start off, and the intro was very different this time. It actually was not a song. It was, in fact, a French Bible chant. I don't exactly know where it came from, but you hear like a little sound of a submarine in the background. You don't know exactly what it is, but we start with seeing that is exactly how we start off. We see there's a submarine in the water, and we get this entirely silent opening where we see this man. He unlocks the safe, and he takes out a necklace, and he wraps it around his neck, and then takes an MP3 player, and he plugs it in, and listens to this French song, which I don't know what the hell this French song was, but it's been really catchy. I've been listening to it all day. And in general, I really did love this scene. I mean, this is the kind of stuff The Leftovers really does excel at. Is just spending so much time with the characters that we don't even know, and still find a way to really make it riveting. The man actually strips off all of his clothes. Another member of the crew is frantically pacing around the ship, obviously trying to stop the man. So immediately we know this man is up to no good, and the man then goes to him. He bashes his head into a countertop, takes his necklace and wraps it around his neck. He then runs around the ship completely naked, and he opens a port and steps inside the ship's control room. He takes off his necklace, and he's doing all these sort of like yoga poses. We don't exactly know what this is all about, but he puts the key into a hole, basically, and the other members of the crew start banging on the door. He's clearly locked them out, but that doesn't stop the man from turning the key, which opens another door, and this button is in there. And, all the, season long, we've kind of been teased about this, because ever since that trailer leak, there's been a scene of a man pushing a button. Well, we finally get that here, and we see this man, he, without thinking, does in fact push that button, and I love that we didn't actually see what went down. That what something the show gets so well is that what we can imagine would happen is so much scarier and tumultuous than what actually happened. And, we're willing to believe that the ship clearly was exploded. He set off a nuclear explosion, and that really is the catalyst for the rest of this episode. Again, a completely unrelated scene, something that just felt so weird and unrelated, but actually connected to the main narrative. It's just something The Leftovers is genius at. This goes all the way back to the premiere, I think, where we had that colony in Australia, who was so dedicated to the Bible. Again, it's a lot more connected than it should be. And in a lesser show, this would just feel like a random scene, like it doesn't really mean anything. However, here, like I said, it really is the catalyst for the rest of the episode, and very well does set up, the main conflict for where this episode is really going, which I thought was just extremely well done, and really to show how great this show, like I said, excels at single character focused storytelling. So, and we see Matt, he goes into a house and he knocks on the door, and a man named Arturo answers, and he recognizes him, obviously, because Matt is the Reverend, and Matt says he brought a casserole. Arturo's wife listens to the report about the launch of a submarine, and Matt then goes to Arturo's mother, and asks how she is, and Arturo says she's still fighting, and Matt assures them that they've all been praying, and then tells him that he needs him to fly him to Australia. So immediately, we know what Matt obviously wants to get there, and Arturo asks why, and Matt says that a cargo plane with a donated food for El Salvador is sitting on the tarmac in Australia. It's fueled up and ready to go, and he needs him to get him to Melbourne immediately, and he's asking him to fly him there, and it turns out that this is actually the reason why all flights have been grounded. The whole submarine situation that happened, that's why all flights have been grounded, which that was a genius move. I mean, a lot of people are very confused. What was the explosion? This was the explosion, is that there was, in fact, this huge nuclear explosion in France, and obviously that's going to delay any sort of flights there. So, immediately we have this really great conflict that I really thought was very well done, and that says that's only all non-essential flights, military and foreign aid are accepted, and he's not only a valid member of their congregation, but licensed by an internationally recognized NGO, and Randy's available to co-pilot, and Arturo tells him he can't just leave his mother. Like, obviously he wants to take care of his mother, and again, a character we've never met, we already are caring for him because he has this dying mother, and he wants to be there and fulfill his duties to her, but, how much time does he really have left with her? And, Matt has made good arguments. He shows him a bag, which is $20K, which is more than enough to compensate him for his time and get excellent care for his mother, and Matt says that something incredible is going to happen in the next few days on the 7th anniversary, but only if they go now. So, obviously, Matt is kind of with the belief that something good is going to come out of this departure, not something terrible, something good is going to happen. And Arturo says that he said they need to be a miracle on the 14th. And Matt says they will be back, but there's a man, a very special man, and he's supposed to be there with him. Of course, that being Kevin. But he's in Melbourne because of a very unexpected event. He's stuck in Australia, and God has placed an obstacle in their way, but he wants them to overcome it and demonstrate their fate. So Arturo asks if it's a rescue mission. Matt says that's exactly what it is, and he finally does get him to agree to it. So I like the way Matt was able to do that. He graciously thanks him, and he tells him to go and says he has some friends meeting them on the tarmac, and Arturo asks how many, and Matt says that's just going to be the 3 wise men. So he then calls Kevin, and he gets a voicemail right near where the plane is about to be, he's chartering the plane there, and he says he doesn't know if he's getting his messages, but he's sure there's been a nuclear incident in the South Pacific, and he's secured transportation, and he's coming to get him. So John and Michael join him, but also Lori, and Lori was not exactly something that Matt was expecting. He expected this to be just him and Michael, obviously, because John and Michael, and, Matt, John, and Michael, they've been working together in the church. They have a very tight-knit bond. Because of that, he did not expect Lori to come along, and he asked them what they're doing here, and Lori says she's getting him she's getting on his plane, and Matt is surprised that John invited her, and she says the only reason he knows where Kevin is because he called her. And yeah, I like that Lori is taking credit for this, because Kevin was the first one to call Lori. He could have called Matt, he could have called John, like Lori said last week, he could have called anyone, but he chose to call her. Why? Because she's the one who understands him the most in these kind of situations. And Matt says they're immensely grateful for that, but with all due respect, he's not exactly sure that she entirely grasps what's going on here. And she says that 3 years ago, her ex-husband experienced severe delusions. He tried to kill himself, and instead of acknowledging his mental illness, he turned it into fucking scripture. And when he found out about it, he relapsed and ran halfway around the world, probably to get away from Matt, obviously, because it's just triggering that, that illness or at least to her, that illness that was in him. And she asks if he's even talked to him, and he says he left him a few messages, and he hasn't called him back yet. And she asks about Norris, and she's not picking up the phone either, and he doesn't seem that concerned about her. Obviously, this is his sister. Why is he not concerned about Nora? And this episode, again, really does remind us that the most important thing to Matt is his fate, and that really comes before everything else. Even before his own sister, he doesn't really seem to care about her, because fate is what's so important to him, and that really does take principle over everything. And I think that's a big flaw that Matt does have within this episode, and that's something I think this episode really does highlight very well. So he immediately retorts back, telling her that she basically, that it does sound reasonable to him and that she's trying to get on it, and she says it's his fault. He asks if she brought her whistle because it sounds like she needs to blow off a little steam, and the animosity between these two has never really been stronger, but it actually makes a lot of sense as to why these two would have such distaste for each other, because their methods are completely divided. Matt sticks to the religious, more mystical type answers, that have to do with belief and have to do with Bible verses and things like that, while Lori sticks to the more scientific method, and she always goes with what's the science of what Kevin is going through really is, and, she's part of that whole illusion that, if I don't see it, it's not really there. Matt, however, he believes in all this stuff, and he's, worshipped it for all his life, and I think the choice to divide these two definitely made a lot of sense, because again, these two characters that we really have not seen together a lot in the show. Sure, Matt did have a few ventures to the GR in season 1, but most of those involved Meg or Patty. They never really involved Lori. Lori has never really been a part of Matt's story until now, and I thought it made a lot of sense for them to do that. And again, that's something this season is doing extremely well, is taking characters that have never really interacted before and placing them in scenes together. That's something that I think every final season of a show should do, and this show is just excelling at that in an amazing way. But basically, they do, basically, we see that, John actually does be the one to intervene here, and he tells them all to calm down, says that it is his wife, and if he wants to come, then she's tagging along. That's just how it's gonna work. He's not gonna go without her, and they all want the same thing, to make sure that Kevin gets home safe, and they agree. So John says they should get on the plane and try to solve this like civilized adults, and they get onto the plane, and the fighting doesn't exactly stop. Lori tells Matt that when they find Kevin, she will speak to him, since he didn't call him, and, obviously she's the one that needs to get to Kevin, because clearly he wanted to talk to her, and Matt asks exactly what exactly he said that led her to believe he was delusional, and he asked John if she told him, and John says that she said he was upset, and it's obvious she has not told John the full truth about what Kevin actually saw, and Matt asks what it was about, because he's getting the feeling of not hearing the entire story, and Lori says the whole story is in his ridiculous book, which somehow she convinced her husband and stepson to keep from her, and he says he kept it from her because he knew this would be her reaction. And he asked John if he thinks this is ridiculous. John says it doesn't matter what he thinks, since he'll know in the next 4 days. And she asks what happens then, and Matt says it's the 7th year anniversary of the departure, and she asks what that means, and he says this is his plane and his mission, and he will speak to Kevin because he absolutely refused to believe that he's psychotic. And she says that she was married to him for 15 years, and he used to go through all of their covers before he went for the wine glasses, and he has a tattoo that's misspelled. I mean, she has followed Kevin from day one. She's always known that Kevin is really not well, and we've known that too. I mean, even though we were led to believe in season 2 that he really did see Patty, I mean, did he, or was that just his mind playing tricks on him? I mean, again, that was through Kevin's perspective. We saw everything through Kevin's eyes in those 2 episodes. So was that really Patty, or was that again just through, Kevin's, just Kevin's psyche? Again, is it really messing with him? Does Lori actually have a point here? And she says that he shits 4 times a day. She refuses to believe he's second coming of Christ, and the plane then starts to hit high turbulence, but luckily they are okay, thank God. I thought they were gonna crash, but they don't. But Matt then reads through the Bible, and we see this great scene where blood is dripping onto it, and he takes out this handkerchief, he wipes his mouth, and we have basically been alluding to the fact that Matt is not well. Ever since episode 3, he's not seeming like he's been well. Episode 2, actually, I've definitely been able to tell there's something going on with Matt. I mean, the fact that he's, getting these nosebleeds, and now he's bleeding from his mouth. I mean, this is not a normal thing, obviously. This is not something that Matt has gone through a lot, and he says he needs to know that he's with him, and Michael wakes up, he sees Matt taking pills, asks him what they are, and Matt says, oh, they're just for his allergies, but we know that's obviously not the case, and he says he needs to know that he's with him, and Michael asks where else he would be, and I love this scene because it really does show that while Matt, again, he's staying truthful to his faith, he is in fact lying to a lot of them. There's a lot of things he doesn't want to have to admit, and again, because of his faith, he has really sacrificed a lot of that for his actual health, and now look what it's done to him, and I think, again, that's something this episode very well does show. So Arturo goes to them and then has to break the bad news that they can't land in Melbourne. And John asks what's happening, and Arturo says the airport shut down and they're diverting them. And Matt says it's a relief mission and they're authorized. And Arturo says that they don't care. I mean, they don't really care what it is. They just can't land them there. So Laurie asks where they can land, and Arturo says the closest is Tasmania, which is a long ways away from Melbourne and definitely not where they need to go. So Matt is bewildered, obviously, asking how the hell they can get to Melbourne. So they're dropped off there and they go into the store, and Matt asks if this is where he gets tickets for the ferry to Melbourne. The clerk says yes. And Matt explains the situation, asks the man for 3 tickets, but then remembers Laurie and says 4. And I love that little scene how he forgot Laurie. But Matt asks how long the journey is there, and the man says 11 hours. And Matt says that's really not that bad. And the man says, unfortunately, tonight's ferry is booked for a private group, and he's afraid that their first available is the day after tomorrow. And Matt says that that's too late. They need to get to Melbourne immediately, and this private group must have a few extra seats. You know, even though they've taken up a lot of it, the clerk says that they have boarded the boat, and if he wants to get on, he's afraid he's going to have to take it up with them. So, again, we have this really great conflict with Matt having to go confront this group. So they leave the store, and Laurie notices a lion into a cage on a boat, and this leads us into one of the strangest groups we have encountered on the show so far. And we have encountered some pretty strange groups, and, you know, that's for sure. You know, from the GR to Kevin's hotel sort of fantasy to the random people that Nora met, you know, who have set up this device. We've met some very strange groups. This has to be the weirdest. I mean, just out of everything, this has to be the strangest thing we have seen yet on the show. But like everything else, it actually does kind of make a lot of sense why they do feel this. So basically, Matt goes up to a woman named Ginger, and he asks if he's 91 and having a son. And John says that he thinks he wants him to say something, and Matt says they'd be happy to contribute. And Ginger says there is no money allowed. And Matt asks why he shouldn't ask the other guy whether he's 91 and having a son. And Ginger says that he's a friend of the captain, and Matt says that they are too, and the woman and Ginger asks if that's true. Matt says no, and they explain the situation to her, and says he's appealing to her sense of charity to let them on board, and she says no because there's going to be a lot of sex on this boat, and a lot of it is debased and sinful from port to port, all without judgment. She can tell that he is a very wholesome man. You know, she can just tell that he's not someone who's encountered this kind of stuff before, and he's fine with it. He doesn't care that he's going to see all of these immoral acts because, you know, it's the price he has to pay for rescuing Kevin. That's what matters. He just cares that they are able to rescue Kevin. He doesn't care what he has to do. He will do anything for it. And she asks him to tell him the dirtiest joke that they know, and Laurie's about to tell one, but the woman says that she wants to hear it from him. And Matt then tells this really, really childish joke about the difference between a pimple and a priest, that a pimple waits until you're 12 to come onto your face, and you can obviously tell that Matt is just not really a dirty jokes type of person. And I mean, for Matt, that was good, definitely, because Matt, of course, you know, he usually isn't into that kind of stuff, but the woman tells him that Laurie has free reign, and no law can govern the lioness, and for the men, there's only one rule, so learn it well. Now, when midnight comes, let no man mention their name, lest that man become him, that name being Fraser. And I thought they very well had said this idea of this lion named Fraser. We don't know who Fraser is, we don't know what it's really about, but we do know that if any man mentions the name Fraser, that he is going to become him. So they get into the ferry, which is surrounded by a ton of people naked. They're in, like, wild animal costumes. Every 5 seconds this episode, someone's having sex. I mean, this might be the record for the most nudity I've seen a show in a long time, but again, very risky for the show to do that, and it does show why the show is so different, and the fact that they do take these risks, that's one of the things that really just make the show as good as it is, because it really does have no limitations, and that's kind of like because life in general has no limitations, and again, when you really think about it, this group could definitely be real, and it actually does make sense why this group is doing what they're doing. So Matt is on the phone with someone talking about the nuclear attack, and he asks if they think it's revenge for Agincourt, and they then hang up, and he goes to Laurie, John, and Michael and tells them that flights are still grounded, and they refuse to sell them over the phone, and Laurie says she's going to go to the snack bar to get some sandwiches, and Matt says he's not hungry, and he then tells them that there's still time, even if they can't get a flight, they can take the ferry back, and Arturo can fly them home. So everything seems to be fine there. John lets him know that they will not make it back to Miracle by the 14th. And, I mean, yeah, that's pretty much, you know, how this is going to go. There's no way they're gonna get back there by the 14th. And, I predict that the show's gonna be in Australia for the rest of the show. I don't think we're going back to Jordan ever in the show. I think maybe we'll get a little few glimpses here and there, because, Tommy is still around, and I'm sure we're gonna see Tommy before the show's up. But I'm predicting that most of the rest of the season is going to be in Australia, and they're not going to be able to get out of there. So Matt says they will. John says even if they find Kevin right off the boat, there's no guarantee he's going to come back with them. And he thinks that they need to accept that whatever is going to happen is happening there. And remember, Matt has always been under this, illusion that, Miracle is a safe haven. And even though we've seen that a lot of bad things have happened there, Kevin can't die because, he can't die in Miracle. And that, it did in fact wake Mary up. These are things that he does definitely remember. And John says even if they find Kevin right off the boat, Matt says he needs to be home. Miracle was special for a reason, and they should know that Sid secured his wife and gave him his son. And John says that his wife left him and he lost his daughter, and it's got nothing to do with where they live. They just gotta let it go. And I love how John has really moved past a lot of this. We look back at how John was in season 2. He was a denier. He was just chastised anyone who didn't agree with his belief system, and he believed that everything was, that wasn't real was simply that. It wasn't real, and that everyone was kind of crazy, and he suspected that Kevin was this killer. But as we can see throughout the years, now that he's processed a lot of this information, he really has changed, in a big way, and that's something, again, this episode I think definitely did show very well as it did show Matt's development, also very well did show John's. And basically Matt said it's because he gave control to Lori, and John says maybe if he gave a little more control to Mary, she wouldn't have left. And Matt says that was just a test of faith to see if he'd leave. So if he thinks he's going to be in goddamn Australia on the day of reckoning, and that's just not going to happen. So Michael then tells him he's bleeding from his nose, and Matt then gets a handkerchief out, and he tells him it's fine. He runs into the bathroom to wash his hands, and obviously he's freaking out. This is clearly a lot more serious than we think. He puts tissues inside his nose, and another man then comes out and asks if God hit him, and says that there's no shame in it. He's seen God smite many men on this boat, and ice bags are in the infirmary if he needs one. And Matt asks if he's saying that God is the one who punched him in the face, and the man says that he'd steer clear if he was him. And then we get into one of the most interesting parts of this episode, where Matt, he goes onto the dock, and he sees this man reading, and says he's sorry to bother him, and asks if he's telling people he's God, and the man gives him a note that says he is. And Matt then reads the card about the man, who wants to be referred to as David Burton. And David Burton, this is not the first time we heard an utterance of Dave Burton on the show. In fact, David Burton's name was scattered throughout the entire second season. Back in the first episode of season 2, the Pillar Man, he's seen sending a letter to someone named David Burton, and whenever Kevin went to his, the hotel, he always saw David Burton. So this is not the first time we've seen this character, and I thought they definitely did a very good job with setting him up. Who is this man? Why do we keep seeing him? We finally get some answers as to who he really may be and why everyone is kind of seeing him here. So he has all of these crazy theories that there really was no Big Bang, just nothing but light, and he gives a few facts about the beginning of life, and he's seen all varying from Adam and Eve to all the way to the Holocaust. And this guy's just crazy. He really is legitimately playing God, and he's calling himself God, and, he's saying that I am God, and Matt, again, just doesn't understand that because it doesn't go with his belief system. This is a man who really is shaking him to his core, and throughout the episode really is making Matt start to rethink a lot of the choices he's made throughout his life. So, naturally, Michael just feels that it's a joke. There's no way this guy could actually be God. That's just insane to think about. And Matt doesn't really see it the way. Matt thinks it's blasphemy and that it is an insult to God. And Michael asks if he knows it's not God. Why does this bother him? And Matt says it's because he's saying he is. He didn't even talk to him. He just handed him a card, and he wandered off like he was handing him an autograph. And Michael says he thinks he should tell Lori that he's sick. And it seems that Michael's the only one who really knows his information. And Matt says that he's not. And Michael says that he is, and he should tell her. And Matt asks why he'd do that. And Michael says that John used to keep everything inside, even with Erica. And all that time he was just pretending that he wasn't so angry. And then he met Lori, and she made him better. And Matt says that he got better because of them. He doesn't feel that Lori is the thing that really did help John. He thinks that they are the ones that helped him. They introduced him to faith, and because the work they've been doing, Laurie gave him psychic babble, and they are the ones that actually gave him faith. And again, it was a very wise choice to pair Michael with Matt, because I said it before, season 2, I really did like Michael, but he was a very underused character. So to have him a lot in this episode with Matt and really kind of be in many ways, the one who is, the rational one here, because I'd say John was rational as well, but Michael really is the one who, he's trying to give Matt all these pep talks and things like that, and he's also going through a very similar situation as Matt, because we know that Michael was always the one who was in deep faith in his family, so the pair of these two together, I think, made a lot of sense, and I think it definitely did give Jovan Adepo some of the best stuff we've seen from him on this show. And Michael says she doesn't believe in the same thing that they do, but she wants to help Kevin, and he thinks that she'd believe him if he talked to her, and Matt says that she's not a part of this, and Michael tells him that the three of them were all disciples, so maybe Laurie is one too, and that is something to think about, that, Matt, Michael, and John were all disciples in the Bible. Maybe Laurie can be one as well. So Matt then walks around the ship, and various members are getting fucked, even in an elevator. I mean, it's crazy. There's literally sex everywhere, and everyone's trying to flirt with him, and he finds John and Laurie, and John then asks how his nose is, and Matt says it's fine, it was nothing, and as if he minds if he speaks to Laurie alone for a moment, and John says sure, and he leaves, and Laurie says that a couple just asked her and John to be a part of a four-way, and Matt says that that's very flattering. She says at least she learned about this pride that they join, and she tells him this very long, elaborate story, but again, a very necessary one. This could have easily been really silly, but the Leftovers finds a way to make it feel so real, that basically, back in the 70s, there was a bunch of these lionesses in some wild animal park in California, and they refused to mate with any of the males there, that they just wouldn't have it. But then something amazing happened. The park rescued this old flea bag of a lion from a bankrupt Mexican circus, and he was ancient, and they brought him to the park so he could live out his days in peace, and by the next morning, he had screwed each and every one of the lionesses, and ended up screwing 35 cubs, 35 cubs, and he asked if it was Frasier, and she says to be careful since it's after midnight, and apparently that lion they saw that they put on the boat is actually one of his descendants, and obviously, they're thinking that, hey, if Frasier can give birth to all these cubs, then they need to try to keep his legacy alive for as long as possible, and they're taking him around the world to different zoos so he can spread his seed, and Matt says that it is the foundation of any respectable religion, and she laughs and says that they should play it his way with Kevin. She really does feel it's the right thing to do, and letting him believe he's a messiah might be their best chance of earning his trust, since he has the better story. And Laurie is very much right. I mean, the whole idea of Kevin being crazy is just not as interesting as Kevin possibly thinking that he is the messiah, and in many ways, I feel like that's kind of why the show has gone along with this idea, because maybe Kevin is crazy, maybe Laurie does have a point, maybe we've just seen things in Kevin's perspective for so long, he's really starting to see reality, that maybe what we saw with him didn't actually happen. But the fact is, he did in fact die 2 times, and he did come back, and that doesn't just happen to anyone. So I do think Laurie does have a point here, but at the same time, there definitely is something special about Kevin that she's just not grasping. And again, I think it really is the stark contrast between Matt and Laurie, because Matt is saying that his story's true and is based on fact. He just wrote down what Kevin experienced, and she says he experienced hallucinations and saw things that weren't there, and he asks how she knows, and she says because Patty and Evie are dead, and he asks if that's what he said when he called her, and asks if, and he's shocked, obviously, to hear the name Evie, because he had no idea about it, and he asks if Kevin saw Evie, and she tells him not to say anything to John and Michael, and he asks what kind of person she thinks he is, and she says that she thinks he's a good person, and he says that he feels the same about her. She asks if she should buy him a drink, and he says that he would, just like a moment alone to pray, and she says they'll be at the bar, and if he can't find them, just look for the orgy, and obviously, this is a big moment for Matt. Like, again, he's really being shook into his core. A lot of people are giving him a lot of new ideas of things that he just didn't think about, and I think just those scenes in general were some of the strongest things here, and I thought it was definitely very well handled. So he then goes to the edge of the boat, and he starts throwing up, and he then witnesses a man pushing another man off the dock into the water, and Matt then screams that the man has fallen overboard, but everyone is too busy having sex to listen, and again, because this is such a sex-crazed boat, everyone is just too preoccupied doing their own thing, and they're too self-involved to actually listen to Matt, who actually is the only one who wants to help this man. And Matt then sees the man, says he saw what he did, and the man leaves, and Matt then goes back inside. He tells everyone that there's a man in the water, and he puts in a life preserver to go save him, which finally seems to get the crowd's attention. They didn't care about the man falling overboard. They do, of course, care if Matt is going to kill himself, they think. So the woman thinks he's jumped. They go after him, asks what he's doing, and a man then blows the whistle, and John asks what the hell he was thinking, and Matt says he was just trying to save a man's life, and he tells the captain they need to get the ship's manifest and account for every passenger, and whoever is not on the boat, that's the man that he saw go over. And the manager tells him that there is no manifest, since his people bought out the whole boat, and it's just not that simple. So Matt says he's not one of them, and he tells him that there's a dangerous man, he can identify him, and he's wearing a red hat and calling himself God. And the manager asks if he means David Burton, and it turns out that he's not a friend of the captain, but they all really do know him because he is actually a celebrity within this town, and he was a broadcaster in the Sydney Games. He had quite the touch and was a decathlete back in the 80s, and he medaled for Australia. Matt says that he read about it on the Carrie game right after he washed his hands of the Holocaust. But what it fails to clarify is how he went from being a sports announcer to Jesus. I mean, it's just incredible. How could he go just not even, it's just such a radical turn. Like, how does that happen? And basically, the manager says it happened after he died. And about 3 years back, he went rock climb with a mate just outside Perth, and he fell 100 meters, and he broke his neck, and his mate brought his body into the cave so the dingoes wouldn't eat the corpse, and he made his way back to civilization. But when they got back there, Burton was sitting in front of the cave with not a scratch on him. So he was completely fine, and said that he felt absolutely fine and felt like he was God. And John says that people don't actually believe that he's God, and the manager says that some do, but most are just having a laugh, and he doesn't think he expects so many people to be pestering him. So he hands out cards and frequently asks questions, and he spends most of his time out in Tasmania, and he's got a little cabin down there, and he's a private kind of guy, and he spends a lot of time on the ferry just to be amongst people. And Matt asks if it's so he can murder them, and the manager says that they don't have any other witnesses since nobody has been reported missing, and Matt says that those sex-crazed maniacs wouldn't have noticed anyone missing. And, you know, Matt's not wrong. I mean, they just don't really care. And the captain says if Burton walks in there and confesses, he'll be happy to contact the authorities, and they dock in Melbourne in a few hours, and until then he suggests he go find some dry clothes and then enjoy the ride. So again, obviously, Matt is in a big act of desperation here, because not only is he trying to denounce this man, because he knows this man can't possibly be God, there's just no way, but he also is dealing with, you know, what if God is a killer? What if he, you know, if this man is God, why is he throwing this man off the boat? Why is he making a sacrifice like this? Again, it really does compromise everything that Matt really does believe in, and again, it really does show just how invested Matt is when it comes to religion. So basically, Matt then asks John if he believes him. John says of course he did, and Matt asks if that's like when he told him he didn't molest his comatose wife, and he takes the tinfoil off, and you can tell that Matt obviously does hold John for some animosity. And of course, we know from the last Matt Sendrick episode, John was a very different man. He wasn't believing anything Matt was telling him because he just didn't see it possible. He had no faith in miracle. But now that Matt has restored it in him, John is a little bit more, he's a little less passive than he was, and he's actually a lot more passive, and he's a lot more accepting than he was in season 2, and Matt just doesn't believe he could have such a radical change. And I think it goes for most of the characters in the show. You know, we got introduced to the third season, everyone's kind of in a different place, but as we're seeing, that's not because of, you know, random character aggression. It's because these characters have definitely evolved, and they have changed, but at the same time, they are those broken souls that we met when we first introduced them, such as John was in season 2. So he goes to the area of a ship that's like a club where everyone is dancing, and he goes to Ginger and asks for the list of their members since when they got on it, she had it, and she says it's somewhere, and she doesn't seem to care. I mean, all she seems to care about is the sex craze and the whole Fraser situation, and he tells that one of her people has gone to the water, and they need to find out who it is, and Ginger says she doesn't care, and Matt says why would she, since all they care about is fucking each other, and Fraser and Ginger realizes that he then spoke his name, and she blows a horn, tells everyone that he has spoken his name. She tells him to become him. The crowd then goes to him. They place a noose around his neck, and they take him to a chair. And at this point, I thought, okay, this is how Matt's gonna die, because every single Matt episode we've had, he has come close to death. In the first season, he was, beaten up. In the second season, he was in that whole situation, with, the whole cave and everything like that. Now here I'm like, okay, this is going to be Matt's death. He is going to die in this scene, and it was extremely well done, where basically they explain Frasier's origin, and a large woman then goes up to Matt. She starts undoing his pants, and they're about to put a tube onto his dick, you see, but he does get out of the chair, and he takes the megaphone and says that they're sick, and this is where he draws the line. He says, one of their people is out there floating in the water, and they're out here doing this, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves, and they start booing him, and he runs out. And again, Matt is really the only one willing to stand up and make a difference and really save this man who, he sees as a man. And Matt then goes to Burton, says he saw him and knows what he did, and says he thinks he can get away with this, and tells him not to ignore him, says he's talking to him, and Burton then goes to him, he kicks him in the groin, and Matt then falls to the ground, and another woman then catches up to him and asks if he's alright, and she says she heard what he said in there. This is the first woman that shows him any sense of compassion. No one this entire ride has shown him, any sense of compassion or actually agreed with what he's doing. Everyone's just been way too focused on the whole sex craze stuff, and no one is really focused on the actual issue at hand. This woman, however, seems to be the first woman to actually get it and finally stand up and actually, get what Matt is talking about. And I really did love this scene where basically, she tells him that they're not all the same, and that actually, she does want to help him. And she says that when they dock, to be sure he stays in the boat till he's safe, and she obviously is going to try to help him. So he goes back to John and Lori. She says that he looks terrible, and he assures him that he's fine. He says that he just needs to speak to Michael and John. It's in her best interest if she's not involved. So John says whatever he's got to say to them, he can say to her, and he says that no one seems to care that he just witnessed the murder, and the man who perpetrated just assaulted him and hit him with impunity, and he needs to be dealt with. Obviously what this man did is immoral, and Lori asks how, and Matt says they need to compel him to confess to what he did, and he starts reciting Bible verses, and John says that they're not reaping anyone, and Matt then talks about how John is a hypocrite by saying this, because he used to burn down man's houses down for pretending to be things that they're not, and what happened to that wrath. And Lori says that he found peace, and Matt says that he thinks his daughter is still alive, and that's not peace. And John asks what he's talking about, and Lori says nothing, and Matt finally tells him about what Kevin told her. Now, I did not think this was going to come out this fast, but it does, and John asks her if that's true, and I was expecting that wrath to finally come back, like that wrath we saw in Season 2. I was expecting that John to come back here, but that's not how he reacts. He actually is a lot more rational, and Lori assures him that it wasn't true, and that what he saw was just a manifestation, and it wasn't real, and she didn't want to hurt him, and because of that, John actually does understand. Why? Because there's no reason to be upset at her. Again, John is more accepting because he is now more on board with the whole belief system, and because of everything he's seen, he's not really denying anything, because everything he's seen has been so impractical. I mean, again, he literally saw Kevin shot him in the chest, and Kevin then walked up and went back into town. I mean, that's not just something you forget. That is something that changes the entire core of who you are, and that's exactly what's happened to John. He has changed in a huge way, and I think this definitely really does show that, yes, that hostile John is still in there, but he is now replaced by a more aware, more accepting John, who now knows more about the world and is more willing to find out, rather than condemning anyone who goes against his belief system. And I think that really does show how much John has changed. So Matt says he actually gets it too, and she was protecting him, and he's sorry, and Matt says it's been a long day, and he hasn't had any sleep, and they all need to get some rest before they dock, and Matt says they offered him a bed to lie down in infirmary, and he thinks he'll take them up on it, and this is a distraction. They need to focus on Kevin now. So he goes to the infirmary, talks to the nurse there, and he's given a wheelchair to sit in, and he then goes to Burton, who he's reading a book, and he then cracks him over the head with a shovel. He goes back, and he sees the lion in the cage, and Burton then wakes up, and we get this incredible scene where Matt is literally facing God at this point. I mean, this is, again, God is the person that Matt has done everything for. God has always come first. for everything. And for Matt to literally see the face of God and to talk to him, I thought was a very smart choice. And basically, Burton wakes up, asks where his book is. Matt says he threw it overboard, and Burton says it was just getting good. And Matt says that he knows how it ends because he knows everything. And Burton says that he's just being sarcastic. Matt says that he was just wondering why he hasn't been struck by lightning. And he tells the man to transform those ropes into serpents and free himself. So at this point, he is obviously mocking Burton. There's no way that Burton could be God. He's committed too many immoral acts to be, such a respectable person, to be God. And Burton says that he doesn't need to do that because he's going to untie him when he gets what he wants. And Matt asks what that is. And Burton says that he just wants his attention. And Matt says he already has that. And Burton says he doesn't yet. And Matt says that he's finally talking to him. And the lion starts to roar. And Burton is able to calm it down. So he tells Matt that he's agitating him, and Matt then goes to him, tells him to admit what he did, and Burton says he's done a lot of things, and Matt says he threw that man overboard, and Burton admits that yes, he did in fact do it. He was responsible for doing that, and Matt tells him he'll tell the captain, the authorities, and Burton says no, because he is, and Matt says that he is the authority on everything creation, Isaac and Abraham, the decathlon, and yet he only won the bronze, and Burton says that was before, and Matt says that, of course, because he had to die in a rock climbing accident to become God, just like his son Jesus, who strangely doesn't seem to get a mention here in his little card, and Burton says that he wasn't his son, and Matt asks if he's denying paternity, and Burton says it's Mary's word versus his, and Matt says yet he still sees fit to steal his story for himself, yet he was the one who died and rose again, and Burton says that he died and rotted in the cave, and Jesus had an identical twin brother, and I found this scene to be very fascinating. I didn't really find it as Burton was making fun of Jesus. More, what if everything that we've been taught in the Bible is wrong? What if that's not actually how it happened? What if someone just fabricated it to make us think that God was a more powerful man than he really was? And I think that's really what the scene was trying to show, that maybe a lot of what Matt has read has kind of been wrong, and that's not really the way it's played out. Burton has clearly seen everything, all from creation to the Holocaust, and this is a man who definitely does know what he's talking about. And Matt then asks what he takes responsibility for: dinosaurs, the Black Plague, or the sudden departure. And Burton says that was him. He was responsible for the sudden departure. And Matt then asks why, and Burton says it's just because he could. And Matt says he's going to have to do better than that, and Burton says he doesn't. And Matt says because he does, and Burton asks why, and Matt says there has to be a reason, because everything in his life he's done is for a reason. And I think this scene really does show how people feel about the show in general. I've said it before, a big part of the show is what do you do when there are no answers to things, and that's something that Matt just hasn't really thought about. He just needs concrete answers, and anything that's not concrete, he just isn't willing to give into. He needs something more concrete. He needs something more complete, and he's not just going to take, that answer. There has to be more to it. And Burton then asks why, and basically Burton asks why, and Matt says it was to guide people and help ease their suffering, even though he suffered himself and sacrificed his happiness and let his family abandon him for God. And the lion starts to roar, and Burton says everything he did because he thought he was watching and judging, but he wasn't, and he's not, and he's never really done anything for him. Matt did it all for himself, and Matt asks if that's why he's killing him, and he says when he was a boy, he was sick with leukemia, we find out, and he prayed for him to save him, and he did, and Matt then asks why it suddenly returned. So yes, Matt is sick. He is in fact sick with leukemia, and somehow Burton has diagnosed him with it again, and we don't exactly know why that is, but Burton says he can save him again, and Matt says that he can't. There's no way that he's going to be able to save him from leukemia. He's too deep into the disease for him to be able to do anything, and Burton then says to untie him, and Matt asks why it's back, and Burton then goes over to Matt. He snaps his fingers and says that he's saved now, and he then walks away. And again, just like many things in the show, we'll never know if Burton actually is God. We'll never know if he actually was telling the truth. It's not so much about the answers of, is Burton actually God? It's more of what he just said to Matt, that everything that Matt's been following hasn't been for God. Matt used that because he needed answers, and he needed a reason why he was doing it, and because he was such a religious man, and that God helped him get rid of his leukemia, that has really shaped him into the person he is today. And if Matt really wasn't as religious as he was, things would definitely go a little bit easier for him than they have, and I think this definitely does show that Matt in general, this really has shaken him to his core, and it's made him rethink a lot of things, and it really does change a lot of what Matt is thinking of doing at the end of this episode. So the man on the PA finally says that they will be docking in Melbourne and to dispose of all rubbish and collect their personal belongings before they leave. And Matt is on the dock, and the captain goes to him, tells him the fishing boat found a body, and it matches his scripture. And he's managed to notify the police, and they'll be taking Burton into custody when they dock. And they like him to get out into the station and make a statement. And he says he's assuming he doesn't do any addressing in Melbourne. And Matt says that he doesn't. And the woman and Ginger then talks to two of her men. They head out. Matt goes to John, Michael, and Lori, and remember, to them, he's just been sleeping the whole time. You know, he was in the hospital, everything's fine, but obviously this is a changed Matt. This is a Matt that is a little bit more cynical. He's a little bit more logical than he usually is, and he's also not, he's also tired of lying, and he says that he thanks them for coming. He says he's glad that they're there, and Lori asks if he's okay, and Matt straight up tells her that he's dying in the most casual way possible, just like, oh yeah, Lori, I'm dying. And Lori is shocked. I mean, how do you respond to this news that he's actually dying? And they then see an ambulance and the police arrive. They're about to place Burton under arrest, but he starts to get away. The lion then gets out of his cage and literally mauls him, like eats Burton, and it's really bad, and gunshots are heard in the distance, supposedly tranquilizing the lion. I'm assuming that's what they did. They killed it. And Matt casually tells them that that's the guy he was telling them about. And that is the way this episode ends. Really incredible stuff overall. But let's just get into this episode and where it's going to take us into the last few episodes of this show. So, wow, I mean, again, what another amazing episode. I know I say this every single week, but there's so much to think about heading into this finale, especially when it comes down to Matt here. I mean, Matt is a character that I think has very much been changed from just one chance encounter with Burton. He did not go on that boat knowing that he would run into essentially what is God, or at least someone who is like a godlike figure, and is really making Matt rethink a lot of the Bible verses and a lot of what he's been thinking. You know, what if Jesus wasn't that great? What if he actually died? What if it was just his twin brother? I mean, again, it's crazy to think about, and it really does go like a lot against what Matt has been following, but that's kind of the point, that Matt has always searched for reason, and he's always kind of gone along with that reason. Just like how Lori's also searching for reason. You know, there's always a logical explanation of what's going on. To Matt, there's always a biblical explanation of what's going on. And I really did love the way they found a way to parallel those two and really connect them in a way that we really didn't think they were. I mean, you know, when we saw at the start of the episode, Matt and Lori really could not be more different, but when it really does come down to it, they're both just individuals searching for reason, and that's kind of why they are clashing, because, you know, Matt wants a biblical explanation, Lori goes to the logical one. And then you have John, who's kind of like the wild card in all of this, where, yes, he, at a time, was very much like Lori, where he denied any sort of biblical stuff that was going on, but now that he has gotten more involved in the church with Matt and Michael, now nothing really does... You know, nothing really is, objected. I think everything is kind of exceptional, and he kind of just, you know, thinks that, yeah, there could be a possibility. I mean, again, think of everything that John has seen now at this point. Of course that would definitely be a possibility, and I thought that was definitely really well handled here, the way they really did connect those three in the episode. Even though this was, you know, to the core Matt's episode, this was very much Lori and John's episode as well, and I thought that was definitely really well handled. I know a lot of people said it. I don't think this is the end of Lori and John. I really don't, and I'll tell you guys why. Unlike Nora and Kevin, these two are actually talking out their problems, and they're actually talking about what's, you know, bothering them, and really trying to move past it. You know, John is in a place of faith. He's in a place where, you know, he's now in a place of solace and things like that. And Kevin, I think, wants to be there, but he's just haunted by too much, and there's been too much insurmountable damage in his life that I don't know if he's ever going to be able to get to that, you know, nice, heaven-like place that he clearly does want to get to. I don't really know if it's going to happen to him. But the other thing to really think about is Lori kind of right with what she said about Kevin. I mean, yeah, sure, we know that Kevin has died 2 times, but did he actually see Patty, or is he just crazy? Is that actually what's going on? You know, did he actually see Evie, or is he just crazy? Or is there a more divine intervention? And a lot of people talked about this that in many ways this could very much be a divine intervention. Like, he saw Evie for a reason. He saw Patty for a reason. We were never really given that reason, and again, I think it's intentional because what's Matt doing? Searching for reason. And what did Burton tell him? Sometimes, mate, there are no reasons, and that's the truth. Sometimes there just are no reasons, and that's something that a lot of these characters aren't really understanding, that sometimes in life there just are no reasons and they need to do what they can to try to move past that. That's why I think we're never going to know really what happened to Mary. Is Mary actually going to be okay? Did Miracle actually, wake her up, or was it just a chance thing? We're not going to get the answer to that because, again, there is no reason. It just sort of happened, and Matt is taking it as a biblical thing because that is what he has been associated with his entire life. That is what he has dedicated his entire life to. So obviously he is going to turn to something biblical, and Lori's going to turn to something more psychological because that's what she's had all her life. So you get what I'm saying? These are two characters who half of their reasoning I don't think is actually right. I think it's because of who they are that they always turn to an either logical or, scientific or biblical explanation when that's not actually the case. I think definitely they're kind of both wrong. Like, I don't know if they're actually right. And again, I don't think the show's going to tell us because that's what the show's about. There are no answers in certain things in life. And that's something that I think Michael actually really does understand here, that sometimes there just are no answers, and maybe that guy, yeah, he was crazy, but Michael's not letting it get to him because sometimes there just are no answers, and I thought, again, that was very well handled. Now, let's talk about Matt. Matt obviously is dying, and I predicted it from the start. Like, the second we saw Matt and he was coughing up that blood, I knew definitely something was up, that there was no way that this is just going to go away. Matt is definitely dying, and I don't know if he's going to be if he's going to survive the season. I really don't know if that's going to happen. I have heard a lot of people say that the show is going to end in a peaceful place, because let's look at Erica, for example. Erica's not really on the show anymore because she has finally moved past everything. She has essentially let the mystery be, and that's something these characters just aren't really willing to do. They're always trying to find an explanation for things when you got characters like Jill and Erica who have just let the mystery be, and their life has become better because of that. And I think that's something this show really has presented very well, and I think that's something that these characters really do need to do, is sometimes you just need to let the mystery be. That sometimes that's just what it is, and it's not so much how it happens, it's just that's what is, and there's really no other way to interpret it, and that's something these characters just aren't fully grasping, and I think after this episode it definitely is going to make them reshape their way of thinking. But overall, guys, also, where are we going to go from here? Obviously, are they going to get to Kevin? Are they actually going to get out of Melbourne? Matt's convinced that they're going to be able to get out of Melbourne before the departure, but I doubt that's actually going to happen. I don't know if it's actually going to go the way, but we'll have to see really what happens there. But overall, guys, this was such an incredible episode. Right from the beginning with that submarine man, this was just a very riveting, highly compelling episode of TV that once again just shows why the show is the best. It was so masterful. It was an incredible episode for Matt. It was an incredible episode for John, incredible episode for Lori, and again, really did reiterate the major theme of the show, which is what happens when there are no answers and how do you go on with your life because of that, and I think they handled that perfectly here. This show is quickly winding down. It very much has made me upset that we're losing it, but I'm very happy we're getting episodes like this, and without a doubt, guys, once again, I am definitely giving The Leftovers Season 3, Episode 5. It's a Matt world, a 5 out of 5 or an A+. I know, guys, 2 weeks in a row now, but this show is phenomenal. It's just churning out amazing episode after amazing episode, and so far, I think they definitely could be on the path to improving Season 2. I mean, Season 2 was an amazing season, the best season of TV I've ever seen. Season 3 could very well surpass it. I love we're getting out of the season. This was an incredible episode for Matt. We finally did get that in-depth look we've been waiting to see with him. It really did show us where we're going in the foreseeable future, and from here, it definitely makes me very intrigued to see where we're headed in terms of, the story from here. So, overall, guys, I'm this episode, The Leftovers. How much you guys thought of this episode overall? Left your thoughts. And I'm sorry these reviews are so long, but I just can't do these reviews in 30 minutes. I've tried. It's just not possible. I have so much to say about the show, and I have so much love for it. I need to, I need to gush. I know I gush a lot in these TV reviews, but this is a show that I just need to gush about. I'm sorry I need to, but that's just how it works. But overall, guys, let me know what you guys thought of this episode. We have 3 episodes left, and I can't tell you how devastating that really is. I'm going to be an absolute wreck on June 4th. I'm going to tell you that right now. just because of how important I think this show really is, and just how incredible it really is. There really is nothing on TV quite like this show. But that's my review. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for American Gods, another show that's very unique, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.